Hello and welcome to Recruiter 360 TV with me, Toby Babb, and delighted to be joined today by Tom Winslade from Cube19.
Morning, Toby.
How
Thanks for having me. Yeah, very good.
Good to have you in. Good to have you in.
Good.
So we've been talking about doing this for a while.
Yep.
Because as many people at home may know, but if they don't, I'm a massive lover of data. Okay. Not usually one of the most glamorous sort of things to talk about, but when we look at it and where it came from is probably about 2012. It was 2012. It's just after the Summer Olympics, the London Olympics. And I got fascinated at the time about why sports people were looking at data and the performance scientists behind the elite performers within the Olympic programme were getting such great results based off some of the analytics they were doing, and they were looking and they're going after those results. Then I looked at it back in the recruitment sector, and I saw people were seeing it as a stick in KPIs, and everyone hated KPIs, etc., etc. Where it was exactly the same data trying to make people run faster or do more deals. And that's when we started looking at it a little bit further, and I met up with the guys, at, Dan and Joe at Cube19. And your business has flown since then, right? And I think data's taken a massive step forward in the recruitment sector. We've known each other for a little while. We've quite often spoken about our mutual love of sport. You've played at reasonable levels within that sort of space, and taken a lot of that same sort of theory towards us. Tell us a little bit about your background first and foremost, and then a little bit about how that applies to Cube.
So I've been in the recruitment industry now, working at Cube19 for 6.5 years.
Wow.
I know, it's gone quick, right? Met Dan actually just through some networking opportunities. Someone that owned a recruitment agency, and I knew at my cricket club. So my background before that was sport, and I was playing a good level of cricket. I played England 19s, played at Surrey, and that was obviously my passion, and my goal in life at the time was to be a professional cricketer. Naturally, like anything, didn't quite work out for me, but I think took a lot of learning experiences from that and strength towards it. So when I was looking for a job, as I say, came across Dan and actually saw the opportunity to work for, first of all, a brilliant leader in Dan, having a clear vision for what he wanted to achieve with Cube19, but also seeing the correlation between what Cube can help companies do in this space, and how that can sort of relate back to some of my sporting experiences, working smarter, talking about the marginal gains and small increase in performance that you get at high level. And I think the industry at the time, and arguably still is, quite naive in terms of how it was using data to really drive that performance on. And if you compare it to other industries out there, arguably the recruitment industry doesn't use data as well as it could. And so I think there was a big space for us at the time to really come in and first of all educate the market of the value of data, but then also of course improve our product and getting companies like yourself on board early on in the process to drive a product forward which is focused on the recruitment industry itself.
I remember actually Dan talking to me at the very early stages about a book which he'd read that sort of prompted this. I think he was on a gap year somewhere after having sold his last business and read a book called Competing on Analytics. And I think that's a really interesting part of it, isn't it? Competing on analytics, which is basically giving yourself that advantage through a series of marginal gains within data. What sort of stories have you got around how people can really sort of take that further forward and compete around data through a series of marginal gains, and what do marginal gains look with on a data front? Yeah,
well, I think first and foremost, the recruitment industry is competitive by nature, and it's only getting more competitive. Margins are getting squeezed. It's a struggle to find good talent and retain it. Working with clients closely and building great relationships and making sure you're doing the right mix of new business and repeat business. All of that poses a challenge for a recruitment agency, and I think the more that you can use data to really understand why you're good at what you do first and foremost, and then how you then model that success and translate it into an intuitive platform so recruiters can understand what they're doing day to day. I think it poses a challenge for recruitment companies. I think that's why we do what we do. And I think when you look at marginal gains, it's a recruitment industry and a recruitment company is made up of majority fee earners. So you don't have to get huge amounts more out of every person to see huge increase in revenue and top and bottom line performance. So it's about the small, margin, the percentages here, the percentages there, working the right job with the right activity, working with the client that is really profitable, rather than just sending CVs to jobs for the sake of it because you've got to hit a metric that someone's set for you, which doesn't necessarily have a relation to you performing better. And so I think marginal gains is throughout the whole way of the process, not just looking at consultant performance, which most companies have access to that data, but it's analysing the whole business itself, looking at your clients in detail, understanding, if you've got a superstar candidate, are we marketing them out to the right jobs at the right time? And then at the same time, making sure that we're working the right jobs with the right activity to give ourselves the best chance.
This is the sort of insight that we're talking about, right? So I think traditionally the broken model of KPI management is, let's have a look at a standard basis of this is how many calls you should do, this is how many interviews you should do, this is how many CVs you should send out, etc., etc. And what we're talking about here is individualising and putting some real data intelligence into what people are looking at, right?
Yeah, to coin a phrase that you used a lot historically over the last few years, performance science. I think recruitment companies set KPIs, and often it's because that's what their boss did 10 years ago in recruitment.
Yeah.
But naturally, times change. It's much more about the relationship these days. So, you've got to be meeting your clients, and you've got to be making smart calls, not just calls for the sake of it. And I think companies typically don't do enough analysis as to why a KPI should be set. And that's where the negative stigma comes around KPIs, because recruiters are getting asked to do something to achieve a number which doesn't necessarily have a direct relationship on them making more money. And so the whole education around that piece, making sure that you look into data and understand per individual what success looks like, because two individuals with the same level of experience working in the same market could actually have two different processes which lead to the same outcome. Yeah. And so it's about understanding that and then giving the recruiters and the managers a platform to manage that in real time, so that they can understand the consistency in that process and making sure they are hitting the metrics which are relevant to them to achieve the success that someone like yourself wants the guys to be doing there on the floor.
And that's so important, isn't it? That sort of individualisation of it, because as you say, there are different processes that people can take to get to the same outcome. And I think sometimes people sit around them and they look at the numbers of people who are next to them, who might have 3-4 more years experience. They might recruit in a slightly different way, or they might have a better skill set. And the critical part for me is about individualising and making sure you know what you've got to do to it. There's one of our speakers before Damien Hughes, Professor Damien Hughes, talked about success leaves clues. And success leaves clues applies to individuals much more than it does, there's the top biller, do what they do. Because I think if you are generally tending to do what a top biller does, it might not necessarily garner the same results. Definitely. And that's something which I think we need to look at.
Yeah, and I think it's a big thing, top billers are typically the ones which don't have as much pressure on them to track their own activities, because they do well, so let's just let them get on with it. But flip that on its head and say, well, your top billers are doing something right, so let's understand what they're doing right and then model that success. Naturally, junior guys aren't going to be doing the same thing from day one as the top guys, but it's about working smart. And I think when you look at things like job coverage, a recruiter working 10 jobs with one interview at every job, arguably they've got 10 chances of making a placement. But when you deep dive into some of those numbers, actually a recruiter working 3 jobs with 3 first interviews at every one of those jobs could have a statistically high chance of making a placement. So it's perception versus reality of the situation, working hard or working smart, and hopefully hard at the same time with that. But it's about those tweaks which good management can have in making sure that the recruiter is focused on the right things, not just trying to do everything all the time.
Yeah, that hard and smart's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people sort of substitute one for the other. I don't want to work hard, I want to work smart. My view is if you're working hard and smart, then you're really going to be the person who's moving ahead of it. So rather than how can we shortcut a system through data to look at it, it's how can we actually put ourselves in the best position to be. And you mentioned this a little bit beforehand, doing the right activity, making sure. I know you guys speak a lot about making will it make the boat go faster and such like as well. But talk to me a little bit about how people can make better decisions based off data. How do people actually put themselves in that to do profitable work and make those sort of calls based off what they can find in a cube or the systems that they use?
Well, as I say, the access to the consultant data is typically there within an agency, albeit I'd argue in a lot of cases it's manual and out of date. So what's the opportunity cost by not having real-time information? Arguably managers earning their keep, because that's it's enabling them to focus the recruiter's activity in the right place. And actually, without data, sometimes it's hard to piece the puzzle together as to why someone isn't quite performing as well as you would like them to be. And so sometimes it's just a tweak there, to get them back on track. But a big thing I think is around the client side. As I say, perception versus reality can be very different when you start to look at data behind the numbers. Clients that are generating a large amount of revenue for you as a business, but actually very inefficient in the process. Could there be clients a bit lower down the food chain potentially, where if you were to put a bit more time and activity investment into them, based on their ratios and the amount of revenue that you're potentially generating off a less amount of work, could you be focusing more activity there? And it's not to say there is a right and a wrong, but I think unless you've got data to remove gut feel and instincts, sometimes that can tell you different to what you believe is right. And so you would make fundamentally different decisions along the way.
What's the kingmakers have you seen? Where have you seen someone who's found a nugget? I'll give you an example. I was speaking to someone recently who talked about I think you were there, when they were talking about 12 seats in a cinema not being booked.
Yeah.
And how over a period of time they worked out that equated to over £1 million worth of revenue lost within those areas. Yeah. These are massive operational opportunities, which I think almost every business, be it recruitment or otherwise, will have. Have you seen sort of light bulb moments happen for companies which has unleashed that sort of level of earnings?
Yeah, we've had a few. There's different examples. A really good one actually relates to looking at source of candidate and actually where we're getting the candidates from. One of our clients who are based up in Manchester actually realised that one of their biggest customers, they were only ever placing candidates that came from LinkedIn Recruiter, but their process was never any different. They'd advertise the job on all the job boards, filter through all the responses, and actually they didn't realise that we're getting all their candidates from one source. And actually for them to realise that, enabled their recruiters go straight to where the candidates were, the relevant ones, get better access to those candidates more quickly, get them over to the client more quickly. And they were able to demonstrate that they knew what they were doing, and off the back of that, I think there was some stats around significantly increasing fill rate of that client, reducing time to fill, and also winning exclusivity off the back of them knowing what they were doing. Very simple analysis of data, but also can be a quite challenging one unless you have that kind of that flexibility to delve into it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting, isn't it? I mean, there's only so much time in a week for a recruiter, and there's only so many physical numbers that can be done during a stage. And if you're investing your time into clients who aren't necessarily going to pay, part of that will be the qualification, but a huge part of it is I'll see people and I'll interview people quite regularly who have put X amount of time or X amount of interviews into a company. They said, I've had over 100 interviews with that client and been unlucky a couple of times with it and maybe done 1 or 2 placements. You think, right, okay, if you can get that amount of CVs over that sort of period, how much time lost is that in those investments? And how aren't we jumping onto it quicker to make sure that time investment is actually invested into the right sort of buying clients?
There'll probably be certain clients in a company CRM that you could argue run at a loss. You're not actually making profitable revenue from them because you're doing so much activity with them, and unless you really analyse it, because there's so much going on, sometimes you don't realise what you're doing until you look at the data behind it and you go, wow, that's crazy, I didn't realise we've been sending that many CVs, getting so few interviews, and actually potentially identifying that the source of the reason why you're not making placements is that the candidate's always rejecting the process because the hiring manager isn't a great interviewer. And if you can identify that, then you can do something about it, potentially not work with that client or potentially go to that hiring manager and say, well, listen, we're identifying this. Have you thought about your interviewing process and the reason why you're losing some of these really good candidates that we're putting in front of you?
That education,
it's the education.
Better service again, doesn't
Definitely.
it? So it's how you can
and
use
you know
it
what you do. You know what you're doing, which becomes, again, it's a great way of getting more business because you're demonstrating that you know what success looks like and the reason why you're perhaps not being as successful as you could be with certain clients.
I think sometimes that's a part of data which gets overlooked, how it actually can be there to, rather than just to monitor, but actually to improve and how you can use it as a tool to make people better. We speak a lot about sports and sports books and things you can take from it. One of my favourite books is a book by Bill Walsh, the 49ers coach, called The Score Takes Care of Itself. And The Score Takes Care of Itself effectively is all about the concept of process over results. So outcomes, being outcome-led and being process-led. One of the things I see time and time again with recruiters is they get so focused on the end result, the number on the board, the pounds in the bank, that they actually forget the reasons to get there. They try and circumnavigate it to get there, but there's always a systematic process that I think makes the best people in the industry. How does data, how does Cube19 help people look at process over results, and what does great process look like?
Yeah, well, it's back to that what we were talking about before. It's identifying what metrics should be in place and that broken down per individual. And then you have to understand that, if you want to go from being a 30 grand a month biller to a 50 grand a month biller, what are the things that I need to be doing more? What does my process look like that I need to be achieving consistently to achieve the outcome I want? And if I think of what I relate back to potentially detrimental to me when I was playing sport was that, if I'd say to myself when I was bowling, I want to take 5 wickets today, I was focusing too much on the outcome, and actually the thought should be, well, I need to make sure every over I bowl, I land 6 balls in the right spot, and I focus on that process. And I think if you focus too much on the outcome, also it can affect your confidence negatively, because you're not always going to achieve the outcome that you want.
Yeah.
But if you do enjoy the process and know that you're ticking the boxes along the way,
Yeah.
the outcome will take care of itself.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the thing at Cube is. It's giving visibility of the process.
Yeah.
Are we doing what we need to do on a day-to-day basis to achieve the outcome we want?
Yeah.
And setting realistic targets around that.
So one of the big issues in recruitment around that sort of commentary has always been the same sort of thing, which is, and I imagine you hear it a lot, saying, look, it would be great to have that sort of stuff, but people just don't put stuff on the system. Data quality is obviously the critical part of data.
Yeah.
How do companies get around that?
The first thing is they've got to have the appetite to get around it.
Yeah.
I think if you're looking at growing a business and you've identified that you're not using your CRM as well as possible, I would say, well, what's the opportunity cost to you achieving your growth objectives? Yeah. If the data's not in the CRM, how can you do the analysis with which we've just spoken about there? Yeah. So effectively, you're not working as smart as you could be.
Yeah.
And I think the point about data quality is that you have to give someone a reason to engage better with the CRM. You're not going to change your behaviour just by asking someone to do more and add it onto the CRM. And I think we see companies try and incentivise CRM use, potentially take away commission for bad CRM use. Yeah. But I don't believe that's a consistent incentive to use it. You have to demonstrate to the recruiters to why data going into the CRM, first of all, benefits themselves. By using this information, you can achieve a 10% increase in your performance consistently month on month, which might mean an extra 20 grand a month billings. Yeah. So it's that demonstrative ability. But then also as well, with you've got the TV screens around the office to drive that competition. Yeah. The recruiter knows if they want the credit for the work, they have to go and put it into CRM. Yeah. And recruiters typically are quite competitive by nature, and they want to be top of leaderboards. And if it's the leaderboards are the right activities, you're driving the right behaviours. Yeah. So it all links back to better data going into the CRM. Yeah. Better quality data with that, because you've got transparency of if it's not right, well, let's go and fix it at source. Yeah. So you can provide better training around good CRM use. And so it becomes a bit of a cycle of, the reasons to why you should be putting data into the CRM, the visibility, creating more data going in real time. Yeah. And naturally, as a business, you can do that analysis, which we've spoken about there with the KPIs. So
it's the what's in it for me, isn't it? That's the bit. People do things because they recognise the benefit to them. And look, I think if you want to have a business that has people there who want to be the best they can possibly be, who want to take their performance, their earnings, their whatever it might be that drives them, and say this is how we can get you along to that sort of route. I think that's the critical part of it, which sort of comes on to an interesting point in my view, which is the difference between a performance-driven company and a KPI-driven company. Yeah. Because I'll be honest, one of the things that I hear all the time when I'm interviewing people is I'm leaving that company because that's a micromanager KPI, KPI business, etc., etc. Now, my view is very simple on that. A KPI-driven culture is whichever business you're in a sales business, you have KPIs, and you can't get away from that whatsoever. Whether you say you're in a KPI-driven culture or you're not, you have numbers that you need to do to be able to get the results that you want to get out of it. And if you want to do more numbers, you're either going to have to affect the quality or the quantity of what you're doing. And if you want to do less, it's probably because you haven't done enough quality or quantity of what you're doing. So everyone's in that space. Yeah. Now, what micromanagement to me looks like is just, you can substitute it for the words crap management effectively, because it's giving people pressure. We've recently hired someone who had management that was coming down on them that basically said, look, you've got to do these numbers because that's the pressure on my back. Yeah. So that's management putting pressure on management that puts pressure on consultants who are just doing things with no real intelligence around what they're supposed to be doing. So in the end, they feel suffocated and they feel like they're going through a rhythm of what they're doing. Yeah. I don't want to answer the question for you in the question, but to me, performance is very much about is showing and giving data insight to allow performance to come through it. That still needs people to be fully aware of what they need to do and need to know the numbers they need to hit to achieve their outcomes and objectives. but also it means giving the insight into that sort of thing. How's that done really well?
Well, I think the first thing is that when you look at why you use data, it's because having a growth mindset.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of speakers, people like Matthew Syed, talk about that mindset of wanting to improve your performance. And I think that if you're in sales and you're shirking away from KPIs, then you're in the wrong job. But as you say, it comes back to, again, what the reason why I'm being asked to do something. But when you can start to look at data and use it from an educational perspective, how can we improve our performance based on what we've done here and where we could potentially be doing, creating better activity? And so I think it's about the appetite for the business, which comes from a leadership, wanting to improve their individuals, in training and platforms around that. I know Ashley Rice was on here before talking about skills and training that you can do from a managerial perspective to make sure you're not only getting the right quantity of data, but also the right quality, the quantitative versus qualitative metrics, which is really interesting one, because I think you need a balance of both. But I think it's just people understanding that using data can help them improve performance, and that KPI-driven culture is only one way. You say the leadership team are driving the behaviours in the wrong way, hitting a number for the sake of hitting it, rather than actually understanding what value we can get from learning from the data itself.
Let's take a sort of minor segue across from this and look at your time in a high performance environment in the sporting context. So let's go back to England 19s. I know England traditionally have been very, very good at performance science and utilising data. How did their teams work with you to make sure you were getting better at your job then? Yeah,
every area is covered to the most minute detail. Fitness, if you're going to play in India, it's talking about quality hydration levels to make sure that your performance is at an optimal level for the longest period of time it can. It's looking at nutrition, it's working with strength and conditioning coaches to make sure that based on what your skill is, what do I need to do to tweak the training to make sure we're getting the most from each individual. And then from a training perspective, it's getting access to to video analysis and analytics around all these variables. And like you say, it's when you're in a high performing culture, you're not making big changes to what you're doing day to day. It's about the small tweaks here and there, changing a technique very, very slightly, which can have a big impact in the way that you're perhaps hitting a ball or bowling a ball, whatever. So it's the minute detail throughout the whole process, not just focusing on one variable, focusing on everything that encapsulates what success looks like at the end of the day.
And so rather than that being instructional, like that you need to drink X amount because it's going to make you bowl that much faster, spinnier, whatever it might be. How did that sort of become to you gold as opposed to a lead burden?
Yeah, I think when you're in that environment anyway, you're looking for any reason or anything that's going to help you make that play a bit better. I would say sometimes on the fitness side that you're told what to do more than what you actually want to do, and I don't think that will ever change. But I think it just comes down to what are your objectives as an individual, where you're trying to get to, and you should be always looking for ways in which you can improve your own performance. Sometimes being sat where you are or in the shoes that you're in, you don't always see it, and so that's where good management comes into play, and you relate that back to a sales environment. You don't always feel it and see it, and sometimes you need someone to step into it and also take a step back and say, well, actually, did you notice that you're focusing too much time there or doing this and this? And actually that can then help you and then understand your own performance, because you then can self-manage yourself because you've become more aware of it that you're doing. So it is just small tweaks here and there. They can have a big effect.
I think that's a really important part to mention onto it there, because you just talked there about the sort of desire to want to be the best. You're going in there fully focused on trying to achieve your dream, your ambition, your goals, and what you're doing. And I think when people start to look at it from a different level, it's just coming in to do a job. So I'm coming in to go to work, and I just want to do what I do and get home again for the weekend or whatever it might be. And for me, data works at its very best when you're sat there as an individual on the receiving end of it, so to speak, looking to utilise it to be the best you can possibly be at doing what you're doing. So that sort of mindset and that approach from the person on the other side has to be spot on to really get the maximum amount of that insight. Otherwise, you just do hear what you want to hear. You hear someone telling you to do more. You hear someone telling you to do this. Rather than actually you going out there and seeking one of the biggest high performance traits I see in people is people who are looking for that opportunity to be better.
And as well, from our experience, from speaking to all the agencies, the thousands of agencies that we speak to every year, it's that often data sits at management level, and so you're not empowering the recruiter to use it themselves in real time to manage their own performance. So that actually puts a burden on management to be delivering and filtering that information back the whole time. If you can switch that mindset and actually say, well, managers need access to the information, they need to be able to understand if people are perhaps drifting off track, and they need some guidance and perhaps pipeline advice, whatever that is. If you can actually shift the majority of that management piece to the individual themselves, setting the right targets, but then giving them the visibility to see if they're on track for their targets, their ratios, managing their own pipeline. That can be really empowering, and that can be effective for achieving really efficient growth, because you can scale your management team in a disproportionate way that you have historically. You can bring on board new recruits faster, because they've got a platform for them to be able to see what they're doing. And so that self-management piece is a huge thing for what we do at Cube19, because I believe in creating a data-driven environment, everybody has access to data, albeit not the same amount, but relevant to them as the individual. And I think that's crucial if you want to really improve your use of data.
I think that's sort of those elements of having a team there who really want to go into that and explore how they can look at the data to get better insights from it. Having a management team who are trained to know what to look for within that, and then to deliver that efficiency from it, and to deliver insight alongside the numbers, insight that's going to help people make better decisions around what they're doing. I want to ask a sort of question off the back of that as well. If you're sat there and you're going to advise a manager on, look, here are the key, the critical KPIs that you'd be looking at to improve the performance of your team, what would you really focus in on?
I'd be starting with, first of all, counterproductive to what we spoke about today. What's the outcome you want someone to achieve? But then analysing their ratios through the process. Again, what Ash spoke about, looking at the ratios, CV to interview to placement. But then when you look at interview to placement, then you've got more granular visibility around that. As we said before, make sure we're covering the jobs with the right amount of interviews. So you can also have a sub-interview to placement ratio alongside of that, making sure that we want to target 3 first interviews at every job we have with that particular client. So I would say it starts from the outcome and then working back through the ratios that you're looking at. If someone's not getting much from meeting clients face to face, don't set them a client meetings metric. They may be better on the phone. So it's about really playing people to their strengths, right? And making sure they're doing what they're better at doing. Perhaps looking at a 180 desk model rather than 360. If people aren't good at doing BD, but they're great at sourcing candidates and delivering on those jobs, get them doing more of that. And I think it's just the analysis of all of those metrics, but keeping it quite simple. Don't bombarding people with too many KPIs. Making sure the ones they're set are clear and achievable first and foremost, so people are confident in hitting them. And start with the outcome that you want to achieve, and then work back and use the ratios to effectively model target.
I think these ratios are really important, aren't they? Because people say, right, I want to double my billings this year. I want to earn twice as much. Now, twice as much might not actually be doing twice as much. And you look at over the course of a year with let's take our business as for example, a 5% improvement in hit rate. How many jobs you're filling. A 5% improvement in that can mean hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not more, millions of pounds. By doing the same stuff, not doing anything more, just with the same numbers, you've got the opportunity to open the door of all that sort of thing by making better decisions. Same with your interview to deal ratio. How can you put yourself into that? And that's what I mean by insight-based analytics. It's giving people the stories of saying, right, here's your issue at the moment, and here is 2 or 3 things that you can focus in on to do that. And that to me is where good management starts from having managers in there who are working with consultants who know intuitively to look at the data and say, right, how can we unlock this story without saying just do more?
Because when you look at those ratios as well, naturally for everyone, you want to see improvements in efficiency. So as someone becomes more experienced, you'd hope their interview to placement ratio goes down. But actually then that feeds into the client stuff we spoke about earlier. The way to get your ratios more efficient is to be working with the right clients and working the right jobs. And actually that's where management have their play in the process, because they should be helping the recruiters to understand where they should be focusing more of their activity. Let's not keep sending the CVs to this job that's been open for 60 days and we're just sending CVs and we're not getting much back. We've got this job that's been open in the CRM for 3 days. No one's done anything on it yet. Why are we leaving that opportunity potentially to waste? So it's just about focusing people in the right direction.
I remember actually when you guys gave us a bit of insight from our own data a couple of years ago, which showed about jobs which have had activity and CV sent to them within 48 hours of them arriving, 24 hours within contracts. It's stuff that you probably know, but intuitively you could see a seismic difference between the success of that particular deal or that particular job being filled when activity was happening further. And what we were able to do off that was build a process called the 48-hour process that was geared up to making sure that jobs were worked and covered efficiently very quickly within it. So again, it's using the insight from what the data's telling you to make better calls around what you're doing.
Yeah, and if you want to grow a business, consistently improving NFI per head's one of the key metrics you should be looking at. You want someone to be working less jobs but have a better fill rate. So less wasted activity effectively. And that's huge. Momentum through the process. At what point do we need to send CVs by, or do we need to have interviews arranged by to make sure that we're optimising our chance of fill? And you know what? If the momentum's not good on that job, let's take a step back from it and be focused more on ones which we know we've got great engagement with the client. They're really hungry for us to be streamlined through that process and accelerated. So let's focus our activity there. We don't have to be working every job. We need to be focusing on the right ones, the right jobs.
And even better when it's more jobs and more activity.
Well,
and better hit rates.
That's when you can hire more recruiters.
Exactly. So so there's massive opportunities in it. I think for me it's one of the big changes over the last 15, 20 years of my time in recruitment has seen how with better information you can make better decisions around what you're doing. You'll always have that ability to ask better questions, to have that sort of stuff, but to have the insight behind it should be pushing people up tenfold in terms of what they're able to do.
And it's not always what you are doing. Sometimes it's what you're not doing as well. What jobs aren't you working? And what opportunity, what money are you effectively leaving on the table?
Definitely.
So it's looking at data both ways as well.
No, I agree
finding those golden nuggets.
Speaking of golden nuggets, it's my last question for you, which is someone which we always ask everyone on the show, which is if you were to give one bit of advice to someone in recruitment, and it can be about data or about the world from everything you've seen, say 6.5 years of looking at loads of different companies and seeing the good, the bad and the ugly of the industry, what bit of golden advice would you give?
I'd say it's quite generic advice based on my experience in working in the recruitment industry and actually to working it now. And I think in sales, and more than anything, I think you've got to love what you do. You've got to love the process, love hitting the targets which lead to the outcome. And I think passion's infectious. It rubs off. And if you can be passionate about what you do, listen, you're not gonna have a great day at work every day. But if you can have more enjoyable days and good days than bad days, when you do have a bad day, if you genuinely love what you do, I think it will help you sort of ride through that time. And as well, the enjoyment comes with the confidence of achieving those numbers. But I'd say don't focus too much on the outcome. Enjoy the process that comes with that, and generally, just believe in yourself, because sales and recruitment, it's not an easy job. Life isn't easy, but if you can generally do something you love, that passion rubs off to clients and candidates alike. I think, do you know what, I'm so pleased you said that, and we've heard variations of a similar sort of thing, but one of my big sort of hobby horse things is to love what you do. I feel very lucky that 20 odd years ago when I first got into work, 21 years ago when I first started working, my dad sat with me and told me to do something which I really loved, and I feel very lucky to have had a long career now, doing something that I can come into and look forward to every single day. I really feel sorry for people who live for the weekend and do that. And I think it's a choice. I think it's a choice about how you approach things. There will be two people doing exactly the same thing and having very different results based on their mentality and how they approach things. So I think it is utter wisdom on that. And there's a quote which I've always enjoyed about it, which is, you can't always do what you love, but you can always love what you do. And that sort of thing means that I'm sure, despite that, Dan not wanting to hear it, if you could have your time again, you'd be out there right now in the West Indies. I definitely would.
Picking off and salvaging the.
Hopefully winning a game.
Maybe filling the troublesome number 3 spot or whatever it might be. But the fact is that you're in a job now when I've seen it, and I've seen it since you started in this. You're someone who's passionate about what you do, how you do it. You come into work with a zest about what you're doing. That absolutely shows in what you're doing and why you've been successful and where you go. So, and it's the same for everyone out there. So
agreed.
Great.
You can always find something that you genuinely enjoy doing. And if you're not enjoying it, then take a step back and find your route that's gonna give you that fulfillment day to day.
Definitely agree. Mate, it's been great speaking to you. Thanks so much for coming into it. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you very soon on another episode of Recruiter 360 TV. Tom, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Toby. Thank you.